I just mentioned in my prayer, but what series are we in right now? It's probably up there right now. The Rogue One series. Rogue 2, that's right, Rogue 2. So we've been over the Rogue One series. And now just to recap, Rogue One really quickly. All right, Rogue One, the Star Wars story is basically the story of how they got the Death Star plans for Episode 4. So it's right before Episode 4. You have this band of rebels who have discovered that the plans are on this tropical planet. And they're like, we need to attack this and get the plans. And some people are for it, but there's a lot of people, actually a majority, that are against it. And they're like, nope, we're not going out there. It's too risky. We're going to lose too many people. And these rebels decide, you know what? We're gonna still do this. So we have this team of rebels. We have Jin, we have Cassian, Chirrut, Bodhi, Baze, and everyone's favorite droid, if you've seen the movie, K2SO. Yes, we all love K2SO. We were all bummed when he died. But they decided to go against the orders. If you haven't seen it, that's your fault. So, it's been out forever. It's on DVD now. Go and see it. Anyways, they go against those orders of we're not going out there. And they get some people together, and even some people as they're going out hear this, and they head out, and they go for this mission where they're probably facing certain death, and they're trying to get the Death Star plans. And it's true, most of them died. In fact, all the characters that we come to know and love throughout this movie that we're invested in, they all are dead by the end of the movie. But it wasn't all for nothing. They were successful in getting the Death Star plans. And in fact, again, we're in this Rogue One series. They had called themselves Rogue One, okay? And if you look at it, they were actually the ultimate rogues because of the fact that, hey, if they didn't do what they did and went against orders, the Death Star plans would have never been achieved, would have never been retrieved, my bad. They would have never been gone, and there would be no episodes 4, 5, and 6. The Empire would still be in control, and they would have this weapon of mass destruction at their side that no one would know how to stop. But because of what they did, it changed all of Star Wars history because of them taking a stand and going rogue. And today, like I said, they're the ultimate rogue. We are going to be looking at the ultimate rogue when it comes to the Bible. And again, it sums up perfectly with how at the end of Rogue One, when they get the plans and the captain is passing it to Princess Leia and is like, hey, what is it that they've sent us? And she's like, hope. And the ultimate rogue that we're going to read about today gave us the ultimate hope when it comes to our eternal salvation, Jesus. So today, if you guys want to turn with me, we're going to be in Mark chapter 2, and we are going to be starting in verse 13. So, if you guys have trouble finding it, it's in the New Testament. Luckily, God gave you a table of contents. If you still have trouble, luckily, God gave you friends. I don't know what to tell you after that, so you're on your own. So, Mark chapter 2, it's right after Matthew. So, Mark chapter 2, verse 13. I'll give you guys another second to turn there. How was worship? Did you guys enjoy worship? Yeah.
Yes, Bob.
It's a lot of fun. Oh my goodness. All right. So Mark, chapter 2, verse 13. And here we go. Let's jump right in. Once again, Jesus went up beside the lake. A large crowd came to him, and he began to teach them. As he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. Follow me, Jesus told him, and Levi got up and followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. When the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with the sinners and tax collectors, they asked his disciples, why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? So here we have the scene right here. We have Levi, a tax collector. And Jesus sees him at his tax booth. He's doing his job, and he goes up to him. And he's like, follow me. He's like, cool, I'm going to follow him. And later on, he's like, hey, you want to have dinner at my place? Sure. So they're having dinner. There's all these tax collectors with them and everything. And the Pharisees see this, and they're like, what the heck is this guy doing? This is the guy who is the supposed to be claiming the Son of God. His ministry is just starting up. And here he is hanging out with tax collectors and sinners, as it says. Now, again, When I first read this, I'm like, tax collectors, what's so wrong about tax collectors? I mean, I guess we have tax collectors in our society today. I mean, they collect money. We don't like giving money away all the time necessarily, money that we've earned. But what's so bad about it? Well, let me explain. But first off, can I get a volunteer? Others? Let's go. We'll go right here. I saw. Come on up, Lauren. Okay. So, come on up here. All right. So this is Lauren. Everyone say hi, Lauren. Okay, Lauren. Let's say that we are back in Jerusalem. We're back in those days.
I'm sorry, she's sitting on.
Okay. You live in Jerusalem. Okay, you're hardworking. We're friends. We're buddies and everything. And you work hard. And you're like, all right. Right now you pay $5 a week for your taxes. Okay, not that much. Okay, $5 a week. Okay, and then the Roman government comes in and is like, we're changing everything. And so we're like, we want to get money from people. So we're friends, and I go to them and I go, hey, Roman government, I can get you $25 from each person in the city of Jerusalem or the city of wherever you live, okay? And they're like, oh, you can get $25 per person from the city? It's like, yeah, I can do that. It's like, all right, you've got the city, the city's yours. Now, here's how the Roman government thinks. Hey, as long as we get our money of what you promise, you're good. Whatever you get on top of that, that's yours to keep. So I come up to you and I go, hey, Lauren, I need $50 from you for taxes this week. How would you feel right now? Especially even if we were friends and you're like, we grew up together and everything, and you're like, Scott's asking me for $50 when I used to just pay $5 for taxes. How would you feel?
I have no clue.
You have no clue? How would you guys feel? Angry, mad, what else? Afraid. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, I appreciate it. So, you would be mad. You would be angry. India said last night, she was like, I would want to punch you in the face, Scott.
I would so do that. I'm down.
I wouldn't blame her. Here's the thing about tax collectors back then, is that they were considered traitors to their people, because the tax collectors were Jewish people who decided they sided with the Roman government, and they would do exactly that. They'd be like, hey, we're going to get this much money, and it's like, hey, we're going to add a bunch of extra money on the top. So they were considered traitors. They were considered thieves. In fact, this is what it was like for them. If someone became a tax collector and went to the public service, okay, for the Roman government, which the Jewish people, they hated the Roman government at this time, but if someone entered this service, they were instantly a social outcast, all right? They were disqualified from being a witness when it came to a Jewish trial, okay? Disqualified from being a witness, okay? On top of that, they were excommunicated from the synagogue. And lastly, they were considered a disgrace in the community. Not just them, but their entire family was considered a disgrace because of this one person being a tax collector. And it didn't matter if you were friends with them. So these were social outcasts. These were people that if you looked at them, you're like, these people are unlovable. And that's where the Pharisees were scratching their heads, and they were confused. And they were like, why are you doing this, Jesus? You're a rabbi. You're Jewish, and you're hanging out with tax collectors and sinners. You're hanging out with the most unlovable people that there are. And Jesus, he gives the perfect response to them. And he says, at the end of that, on hearing this, Jesus said to them, it is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but the sinners. And we see Jesus right here telling them, look, here's the deal. Yes, they're unlovable. Yes, they have sin in their life. But this is who I've come for. I've come for the unlovable. I've come for the social outcast. I've come for those who don't feel worthy. Not for the righteous. Come for those who don't feel worthy. And I'm sure you're either in one of two positions to where either you know someone where you're like, you know what, I know people who I guess you could say are unlovable. I know those people in my life. Or we struggle with that ourselves and you go, you know what, I'm unlovable. The things that I do in my life, the way that I am, there's no way that someone could love me. And the thing that we see with this response right here and in the actions of Jesus, and when it came to his whole ministry, it comes down to one thing that we need to understand. And it's understanding that Jesus loved the unlovable. Jesus loved the unlovable. And that is ultimately what made him the ultimate rogue, was that he loved the unlovable. This was the core of his ministry throughout his life, okay? On earth, he loved the people in life that were broken. They were considered social outcasts. They were diseased. They were paralyzed. They had physical disabilities. They were considered sinners. They were people that had all this junk in their life, all this mess. And Jesus was like, you know what? I love you. There's a lot of people in society who may say that you're unlovable, but I love you. And Jesus loved the unlovable. And so today, we're going to be looking at 3 ways that Jesus loved the unlovable, where we see it through his actions, and in turn, how we are supposed to be loving the unlovable, those around us. And the first thing that we see is that Jesus, he wasn't afraid to get messy. He wasn't afraid to get messy. Jesus wasn't afraid of this, whether it was physically or when it came to the lives of people and their messy lives. He wasn't afraid to get messy. We see this countless times in Jesus' life. You go all the way to the end of his life, where he's in his final 12 hours of living. He's in his final hours before he's going to be arrested and put on trial and crucified. And here he is having his final supper with his fellow disciples. And they're all arguing over who's going to wash each other's feet. And Jesus he gets down on his knees and he washes all of their feet. Now, here's the thing. It may seem like, oh, washing feet, that's not that bad. Back then, feet were messy. They were stinky. They were horrible. Back then, there was only one footwear. What footwear do you think that was? Sandals. That's right. All they wore was sandals. Legit. All they wore were sandals. Not my footwear of choice. You're probably never going to find me in sandals, but hey, if you wear sandals, that's you. Me, it's either barefoot or I wear closed-toed shoes. But they only wore sandals. And then you're like, oh, wearing sandals. We wear sandals all day. What's so bad about that? Well, back then there was no regular paved streets. There weren't concrete sidewalks. There wasn't all this stuff. It was just dirt roads. You know what's on dirt roads? Poop, mud, a bunch of gross stuff that they're stepping in. So they're walking through this stuff, getting their feet dirty throughout the whole day. So you can imagine what their feet look like at the end of the day, which is usually the only time that they get their feet washed. You can imagine what it looks like. They're probably really gross. Would you want to wash someone's feet when they've been walking in mud and dirt? It's not the funnest thing. And here's Jesus without hesitation getting down and washing their feet. And he's like going, look, this is how I'm going to show love to you. Your feet are gross. It's messy, and I'm willing to go down there and I'm going to wash your feet. The Son of God is willing to get messy. We see this when there's a man with leprosy, a disease that's only spread through contact. And Jesus sees it. And he sees the sores oozing with pus. And he goes up and puts his finger in it and touches it. And you see the hand start to regenerate, and the cells start to come back, and the leprosy go away. And he was willing to get messy there. You see it when he heals a blind man by literally spitting on the ground, making mud, and putting it on his eyes. He's willing to get messy. And you see it that he's willing to get messy when it comes to being a part of people's lives. He wasn't afraid to get down and dirty. He was willing to do that, and we need to do that too. Whether it's physically, which again, like weekend of service, who got dirty moving all that mulch around, huh? I think we all got pretty messy through that. Sometimes that's going to happen. When we're serving people, when we're showing love through service to the unlovable, sometimes it's going to get messy, it's going to get dirty, and we need to be willing to do that. But at the same time, it's not just in that aspect. How many people in your life do you know that you're like, hey, they have a messy life? Maybe there's that girl who constantly has drama going all around her. Maybe there's that guy who you know their parents are going through a divorce right now. Maybe there's that weird kid you know that not really too many people like who gets bullied all the time. Maybe there's that person you know who just lost a loved one to cancer. And their life is a mess. And it's disgusting. You're like, that is difficult. That is tough. And we need to be willing to go, you know what? Your life is messy. And I'm going to love you by being willing to be next to you while you're going through this mess of a life right now. And that's what we need to do sometimes. And that's what we see Jesus did in his life. He wasn't afraid to get messy. When we're willing to do that and get in the mess just like Jesus did, it ultimately shows another thing that Jesus did, is that he didn't hold people's past against them. And that's what we see Jesus did. He didn't hold people's past against them. We see this in the story with Levi that we just read. Levi was a tax collector. Not only does he call him to be a disciple, but he goes to have dinner with them after, and the Pharisees are all questioning this. And Jesus is aware of this. And here's the thing. Jesus was notorious for hanging out with people who were known as sinners, who were like with the prostitutes, with the tax collectors, with people who had sin in their lives, with people who were considered social outcasts. Jesus would be hanging out with them. He was notorious for this, and the religious leaders didn't like this. They confronted him multiple times on this, but Jesus continued to do this. He continued to love the unlovable. He didn't hold their past against them. He didn't have any prejudice against them. He saw their sin, and that's the thing that we need to understand. He saw their sin, and despite their sin, he still loved them. That's what Jesus did. It wasn't just he turned a blind eye to it. No, he saw their sin, and he was aware of it. All right? This is actually you see this in one of his most famous stories when he meets the woman at the well. And he decides to go through Samaria, which all the disciples question because it's like, okay, Jewish man going through Samaria. The thing about Samaria and with Samaritans is that Samaritans and Jewish people, they hated each other. They had this huge disagreement on where God's holy place was. The Samaritans thought it was one place. The Jewish people thought it was another, and they just did not like each other. And so they just would not deal with each other. And Jesus decides, I'm going to go through Samaria, and he goes to this well. And here he is hanging out, and this woman comes by at an unusual hour. They usually come in the morning. She comes around noon, and she comes to get water. And as we learn through the story is that she's kind of a social outcast when it comes to her society. And she's talking with Jesus, striking up this conversation, and Jesus, again, talking with her, that's completely out of nowhere because back then, when it came to rabbis, they would not be caught in public talking to any woman. That was completely against their culture. If you were a rabbi, you did not talk to a woman in public. You were not caught doing that. And here's Jesus going rogue, loving the unlovable and going, you know what, that doesn't matter. She's unlovable and I'm going to love her. And through this conversation, he's like, hey, get your husband to come back here and get me some water. And she's like, I don't have a husband. And Jesus responds with like, you're right. You don't have a husband. In fact, you've had 5 husbands, and the person that you're living with right now isn't even your husband. And he was able to tell her life and all the junk that was in it. And he was able to show love to her and go, you know, I know your past, and I'm not going to hold that against you. I'm here to love the unlovable. And because of that, people came to know Christ because of her. She went back to her city, and people came to know Christ because of her story, because of her interaction with Jesus. And Jesus stayed there for a few days and had fun. But it's because he didn't hold her past against her. He loved the unlovable. And we need to do the same in our lives. Sometimes, again, there's people that we know where they've struggled with gossip in their past. There's someone who we know who's been a bully. There's someone who we know who goes to all the parties right now, or they do drugs, or whatever it is, or you just know them as a complete jerk. They have this past. It could, again, even be that weird kid that nobody likes. You're like, that person has a reputation. And what we need to do is not hold their past against them and be willing to love them. And here's the thing that we need to understand. God's been able to use messed up people. You need to understand that most people in the Bible, not named Jesus, have a black spot on their record at some point. No matter who you're talking about, okay? Even our great Bible heroes, you look at their story, they screwed up at some point. And God was still able to use them because even though despite of what they had done, he didn't hold their past against them. Jesus and even God, when he looks at people, he doesn't see where they're at currently. He sees where they could be. He sees that potential. That is what Jesus saw. He saw where people could be. He didn't see where they were in that current moment. All right? But we need to be careful of two things. Two things that we need to be aware of when it comes to this. All right? The first thing is that we need to understand is that the Bible, I can't give a complete answer to this, but the Bible, it doesn't give anything really that says, hey, Jesus hung out with people while they were sinning. He didn't hang out with people when they were sleeping with someone they shouldn't have been sleeping with, or it didn't say that Jesus necessarily hung out while they were sinning and doing this horrible act of sin. All right, we don't know that, but again, this is an encouragement to be wise with where you hang out with. If you're like, you know what, I'm going to go to those parties and love, especially for your 8th graders, when parties are going to become a bigger deal as you go through high school, you're like, I'm going to go to those parties where people are drinking and doing drugs, and I'm going to be a light to them. I don't know if that's exactly the best place for you to go, because they're going to be doped up, doing what they want, and you're probably not going to be an influence on them. We need to be wise with where we choose to hang out with, all right? With the situations we put ourselves in, because if we're not wise, we're going to put ourselves in a bad situation. We're going to be constant. So we need to be wise with that. All right? The other thing is that we need to understand that when it came to most of Jesus' interactions, is that at the end, there's always a plea, always a command to, hey, your sins are forgiven, go and sin no more. Live a changed life. And Jesus pleaded with them. He would tell them, he would command them, go and live differently. And that's how we need to approach things, is that ultimately we're not approving of the lifestyle that we're given, but that we are showing, hey, we need to live differently. So even though that he loved them, he told them, go and live differently. Again, he saw where they could be, not where they were. North Coast has this saying that we say all the time, which is, come as you are, but don't stay that way. And that's how we need to be treating people, treating our relationships, especially with those who could be considered unlovable. Is we need to go, you know what? I want to have a friendship with you. I'm going to show love to you. Come as you are, but hey, don't stay that way. Come to know God. Come to have a changed life like I have. This is how we are to be viewing those around us who aren't Christian, just as Jesus did. Now, why should we do this? Why should I do this? Like, why? Why should I do this? Well, it goes all the way to the final thing of how Jesus loved the unlovable. And it's only because he sacrificed himself for them. The greatest act of love. He sacrificed himself for them. We know the story. In the beginning, God created what? The heavens and the earth, all right? And he created everything in all the animals, and he created Adam and Eve. And he gave them one command. And what was that one command? Do not eat the fruit from the tree. And what they do? They ate the fruit. That is right. They ate the fruit. And God was like, oh no, a mess up happened here. Sin entered their lives. Sin entered the world. And because of that, we are eternally separated from God. God is like, there is sin. I cannot be near that. I can't be a part of that. So now we are eternally separated. But God is like, you know what? I don't want to end here. This isn't the end game. I love you guys too much. So I'm going to have the greatest act of love of having my own son come down, live life as a man, live a perfect life, and die on the cross as a perfect sacrifice, to sacrifice himself. And that's what Christ did. That is why Christ came. Christ sacrificed himself for all sinners because he loves us all, as it says in John 3:16. He came for everyone so that whoever believes may have everlasting life and will not perish. In Romans 5:8, if you guys want to turn with me, I'm just going to read this really quickly. This is something that goes perfectly with that of understanding just how Christ loved the unlovable and just how much he loves us. In Romans 5, chapter 5, verse 8, and it says, but God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Christ died for us while we were still sinners. And we need to understand that. And when it comes to our lives, we need to have sacrifice. Now, you're like, I need to sacrifice myself, Scott? Yeah, but not in the sense of I need to go out and die. I need to go out like Jesus did. No. But there needs to be a level of sacrifice, all right, when it comes to the way that we love like Jesus did. Sometimes we may need to sacrifice our popularity by hanging out with certain people who are considered unlovable. We could be sacrificing popularity. We could be sacrificing time. We could be sacrificing money. There could be someone who you know, like, hey, is a little bit on the poor side and they don't always have lunch. Maybe you use some of your money from chores and allowance, and maybe you're like, hey, I'm going to buy you lunch today, and you sacrifice your money. All right? There are different areas where you can sacrifice. And it's not going to be easy. It's definitely not. It's never easy to sacrifice something. All right? But sometimes we need to sacrifice these worldly things in order to show the love of Christ as he has showed us. All right? We need the sacrifice. And now we come to our challenge, the end, and going, hey, I've got these 3 points. I see how Jesus lived. I see what I'm supposed to do. Where do I go from here? All right? And I kind of have two challenges. I have one for 8th graders, one for 7th graders, and kind of an overarching one. So for the 8th graders, all right, you guys are heading up to high school. Yeah. I want to challenge you guys, okay? Life is going to get a heck of a lot crazier. There's going to be a lot of more stuff going on. There's going to be things that are going to distract you. There's going to be parties going on. There's going to be all these different things going on, and people are going to start heading in all these different directions. And there's going to be a chance to where you can follow that, or you cannot follow that and continue to live obediently to God. Show the love that Christ has showed you to those in your high school. Be that light. Don't fall into the slump that so many high schoolers fall into. Of wanting to just go, I'm just going to do my own thing. Christianity isn't for me. Don't fall into that slump. Be a rogue, all right? For you 7th graders, look at the examples that were set before you by the 8th graders. Some were good, some not so good, all right? You guys have the opportunity this next year with the incoming 7th graders to set the culture, to show them, hey, this is how we live life as a Christian, as a junior higher living for Christ. This is how we live. And you can set the tone, you can set the culture, and you can be that example for them. All right? Be that example. And ultimately, for all of you guys, it all comes down to this, of the rogue ones, of being that ultimate rogue like Jesus did. The call is to be a rogue, just like Jesus was, to live that lifestyle that he did, so that you can love the unlovable and be obedient to him even when it's difficult, so that ultimately you can grow in your faith and that others can come to know him. This is what it all comes down to, so that others can come to know him, so that they can have the hope that we have when it comes to eternity. Lord, I just thank you for all these students, and I pray that we can answer that challenge, Lord, that we can take that to heart, and this next year that we can do that we can be a rogue for you, whether we're in 7th grade or 8th grade, Lord, and still in junior high, in high school, that we can be a rogue and love the unlovable and be obedient to you, Lord. And that ultimately people will come to know you because of us being a rogue. We thank you so much for everything you've done and for your son dying on the cross for us, Lord. We probably sing your name. Amen.